I feel much better.
Welcome to People Who Inspire. I'm your host, Mary Dreliszak. My guest today has served as a paramedic, a volunteer firefighter, EMT, and has trained first responders. He is a charter member of the HAZMAT team. In so many ways, he's devoted his life to helping others. But not long ago, he found himself as the one who needed help. My guest today is John Hamman. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you're here. John and I go way back. We grew up together in the same neighborhood, so he has lived a very storied life, a very adventurous life, and a piece of that is what happened to you not so long ago. Tell us about it.
In 2015, July 2nd, and I was watching the Pirate game that evening, just like any other night. Watched the Pirate game, went to bed, and woke up about 4 in the morning, a little bit after, and felt a terrible Charlie horse in my left leg and couldn't move my right arm, thinking it was just asleep. And the longer it went, the more I realized that it wasn't getting any better. I was sort of half asleep, pinching yourself, and it just didn't feel right. So I got a hold of my wife and my daughter, who was at the house that day, and they took me to the hospital at Highlands. And at Highlands, I can remember being brought into a bedside, and they immediately had people on both sides of me with an IV on one side and poking to see if I had any feeling on the other side. And that's when I realized that something, I kind of knew what it was, but you don't want to accept it because strokes are like, from an EMS standpoint, we don't hear a whole lot about them, especially a few years ago. So it was sort of surreal, realizing it was happening to you.
It was real. Suddenly you were on the other side.
Right.
Looking up at all of your helpers.
Yeah.
Certainly give you a sense of what it's like to be the patient, for sure. Did they attribute the stroke to anything in particular?
A blood clot that happened in my left calf. That's where the sharp Charlie horse felt. It come up to my heart, and I don't know if most people maybe don't realize this, but when you're born, you have a hole in your heart that heals over the first usually 6 months to a year as a baby. Well, mine never closed. And instead of the stroke or the blood clot coming up, hitting my heart and getting shot into my lung, which would have been probably a pulmonary embolism, which could have probably killed me, it come out, and a lot of it was deflected into the body and then came up to my brain, which caused a stroke.
And at that point, had you even known that you had a heart defect in any way?
No. I didn't have high blood pressure. I didn't have anything other than my cholesterol might be a little bit, on the, not high, but just higher than what they'd like it to be. And I took an aspirin a day just because a lot of my friends had heart conditions and this and that. I figured, well, you know what, maybe I better be careful. So I did do that. And never, if I thought anything was going to happen, I thought I'd have a heart attack or something. Never in a million years I think I'd have a stroke.
So you had a Charlie horse. Did you have any other symptoms?
No. Unlike most strokes, I didn't have anything the night before. I never had any Charlie horses going on before that. Mine was a very sudden onset. That's normally not the way it is, but mine was. So it wasn't like I had any numbness or tingling or, headaches. I never had a headache through the whole event, never. Everybody says, oh, didn't you have a headache? Didn't you get, a little blurred vision or anything like that, drooping of the mouth? None of that.
Right. Let's talk about the symptoms of a stroke. What would people?
Well, a lot of people take it for granted it's just nothing. And the biggest misdemeanor that people do is they want to sort of ply it off as being nothing. They get a little numbness, or they can't feel their fingers, or they have a hard time pulling their arm up, or this kind of thing, a severe headache. You notice that their face is starting to droop. Things like that. Those are stroke signs, and people need to pay attention to those because that's the time is the essence because the damage is happening. And the longer you wait, the more severe the damage. I was lucky in the sense that for whatever reason, I knew it was time to go. And I was never one that wanted to go to a hospital unless I was, bringing someone in. But in this case, it was like I knew I needed to go. And the doctor at Highlands and everyone, I was medicated, sent down to AGH. And there I was 10 days in the hospital just trying to get back to some normalcy. But it can take over a year before you know the full scope of what's permanent and what isn't. My feeling in my arm came back within a day or so, except I still have a little bit of trouble with my fingertips. Are numb a little bit. One thing I noticed is that if you're, like when I was in my hospital bed and someone was in the hallway, their conversations, I couldn't differentiate between their conversation and the one going on in the room, and it became real distracting, and that was really hard. I couldn't read. Like I would sit and watch TV, and one of the things I did is, I guess it was therapy, but I would watch the scrolling at the bottom of like CNN or the ESPN mainly, trying to read it. Taking the Pirates starting lineup at that time, trying to say them. I couldn't speak those things, I was in a heart-monitored bed, so I wasn't allowed to, go out of the ward that I was in. So I would just go along the hallway and try to read the signs and things to relearn how to read. Because all I wanted to do was get out of there.
I thought the more quickly you can recover, the quicker you could get out of there. So you were kind of doing a little bit of your own therapy, knowing that.
Yeah,
Were you also receiving therapy in the hospital?
Yeah, it was, yes. It was a Thursday, and my feeling by Saturday, I was beginning to notice I was getting a little bit better. My goal was by Monday, I'm out of here. When that didn't happen.
You were deciding you were out of there. By
oh yeah, I wanted out of there. I did,
Well, good for you.
My feeling was, I didn't.
Good.
I mean, they sent in doctors in for different things. One of the things they did, they sent a psychiatrist in to see if you had suicidal tendencies because of it. And I'm like, listen, don't waste your time with me because all I want to do is get out of here. You don't get me out of here now, you might have to worry, but I'm fine. And that's not the case because I met a couple people in the ward and talked to them that were younger than me that were really down and depressed, understandably. You go from doing everything to she couldn't move a lot of things. She's going to have to go through long-term rehab. She was a teacher. I talked to her extensively about, you got to want to get out of there. All I wanted to do is get back, and I was teaching at the Career Center, Connellsville, to get back to teach. And this was in the summertime, so I figured I had a month and a half to get better. And I did start the school year on time, though was a little bit taken from what I wanted because I had only able to work half days for the first 6 weeks. The doctor would compromise that much, but I was happy. But the biggest thing after the stroke was a lot of fatigue. I was tired quickly, very quickly. So naps were commonplace at that point.
Yes. And that focus, you had to kind of regain that focus.
And you never get that back. Right. I think that people don't realize, they look at you and they say, well, look, everything's working, you're fine. And I kind of thought that too, but you're not. Whether you want to admit it or not, you're just not the same as you were prior to the stroke. Understand that your brain is a very complex, massive nucleus and everything else in there, but what happens is it finds different avenues for the electric type of signals to go. So it goes from one side and tries to find a different path. And when you're healing, it's finding different paths. And it may not work quite as well as it did originally, but it still works. Being able to move my hands, being able to move in general. Finding out 6 months after my stroke that my right arm and my right side is actually a little bit weaker than it was prior to the stroke, and I didn't even notice that.
And it's 6 months after that, you can still work it? How long can you work and try to improve and expect to improve, or possibly
I think it's a constant battle.
Yeah.
It's still.
Just continue.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I do word games and things, anything just to keep you, sort of engaged.
Right.
you know.
Good. And did you do have therapy in the hospital?
Yeah, a little bit of
And
therapy
after-
there. They did some, mainly on speech and everything, because I had a little bit of trouble. And when I get really fatigued, sometimes I'll slur my words a little bit. Somebody might think you're drinking or something, you know. But it's part of the thing is when you get tired, your brain just says, I just can't do this any longer, you know, and it just has a hard time maybe coming up with a word you're trying to think of or a thought. You know, one of the things that I noticed was I went to a Pirate game the year after the stroke, and I never had a problem like this. Confined spaces, I was a fireman. I mean, that never bothered me. But it was real crowded at you know, for the Pirate game, and I remember I just felt like I was being squeezed, and I'd never had that feeling before, and it was like, oh my goodness, you know, and that was part of the stroke. So you learn different things as you go, and learning how to adapt, you know. It was hard. I mean, I went to work after the stroke for a while at another place, and I did electronics work there because it was hard to teach, because I would teaching diodes, and I couldn't remember the word diode. And
Something that you had known so well.
oh yeah, it was part of your,
Inside out.
you know, part of your pedigree of knowing electronics. You know, if you had two students talking to you at once, I couldn't differentiate between, you know, pushing one out and listening to this one. It just all became a big blur, and I said, this isn't working. You know, I'm not giving the kids everything that I should be able to do. It just wasn't. So I figured, well, I'll just sort of retire and doing this other job. Found out that I almost felt like I was dyslexic. I'd want to put something on the right side, but somehow I'd put it on the left side. And I'd come back and look and say, how did I do that?
Right.
You know? And this continued for a while, and I said, man, I keep messing things up. So I told my neurologist, who in turn sent me to another doctor, a psychologist, and they did a baton of tests on me. And the end result was the doctor looked at me and says, you know, you shouldn't be working. And it was hard for me to accept that for a couple reasons.
You're a worker.
Well, yeah, I guess that's one thing.
Very hard worker.
And number two was it just, how are you supposed to explain it when you look at you?
Yes.
You're fine. How can you, people aren't going to believe this. You know, and the idea, I didn't want to be dependent. I didn't want to feel like I was, you know, using the system. I wanted to work for my ways. Through, and that was the hardest thing. I had a real hard time accepting the idea that it's okay when you just can't do it anymore. And I still, you know, think about that.
Very good. And that's a good lesson, you know, not to, you never know what somebody's going through.
Right.
When you see them, you just don't know. And I love the way that you adapted to it, and in an acceptance of it, adapted to it, and be able to do that. And something else that you did. So all your life you're helping other people, and you still are in so many ways.
I don't know.
But even when you were a patient in the hospital, you were going into rooms.
Well, one of the nurses actually came to me because they knew I was pretty upbeat about wanting to get out of there, and said, would you go talk to, and there was another guy, he was 42 and the teacher was 36. You know, I'm in my 50s when this happened. And they said, could you go in and talk to these patients? Well, one patient at a time, the first one and then the second one. But I said, sure. I said, they need someone that knows what it's like to come and talk to them because it means more. And I always heard that in other facets, but after doing that and seeing it, I know that it meant more hearing it from me than hearing it from a doctor or a nurse or a relative. You know, it's more important because, hey, he knows he's had a stroke, you know, compared to someone who hasn't.
Exactly. You've lived it, so it's the most perfect thing. What had helped you through your recovery? What got you through it?
Family.
Still recovering, but go ahead.
Family was important. My friends, relatives, but friends more than anything else. The cards and things. I didn't think anybody even noticed, you know. And that was okay because understand it. This whole 2 weeks or so that I was in the hospital, especially initially. I mean, I watched the 4th of July celebration up from a window at AGH looking out, and this was sort of like, you know, and you're sort of in like a little bit of like a haze. And I just didn't think anybody really even noticed.
You're out your window, you're seeing the whole world in a form of fireworks going on around you, and you're feeling like you're apart from that, you're separated from it.
Oh, yeah.
And yet cards are coming into you.
Yeah, I was getting a lot of cards, a lot of emails, text messages. People come in to see me, You know, and I felt bad because at that time I really got tired. When it was time to get tired, it was time to go to sleep, and there was nothing I could do. A good friend of mine, Kurt Betters, came to see me, and I fell asleep while we were writing in mid-sentence. That was it.
I'm sure he understood.
Yeah, he did. He still laughs about it. But, you know, and that was just how severely it affected on you, you know. But it meant a lot to me because that also, you know, I always thought it's nice when someone sends a card or, you know, gives you a little note. And it's just, it was almost a part of being just polite. You know, it's etiquette to, oh, well, send. It meant a lot more than what I realized. It really did.
The weight. You got a special card, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Everybody that maybe knew him, Dave Reed from Connellsville, who passed away not long after I had my stroke, sent me a card that I still have here. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but Dave was around Connellsville all his life, and knew him as a fireman. And I got a lot of cards. And this one probably meant more to me than any because of David's, and I guess a disability to some extent, but he was always, I always thought of David as being, you know, interesting, but I never realized how smart he was, and he was. And he sent me this, and it says, and I'll just read it, okay, but it says, "Bless you and Angie. Our family is praying for you and hope for your good health and peace." And here's a guy who's fighting for his own issues, and he has the time to send me this. And that epitomized what caring is all about to me. And this one here was always tough for me to read, but it meant more to me than, and nothing, not to downplay all the other cards and letters, but this one was special because it's come from someone who also is going through his own battles and who sometimes wasn't understood like he should have been, but he was known all over the place. I mean, we put Weatherbug in at the Career Center, I think my first or second year up there. And Dennis Bowman came in to do the honors to have a, you know, like a assembly and everything. And he knew Dave. He said, "Oh yeah, Dave Reed." He taught, you know, Dave sent letters back and forth. So Dave was a very intelligent guy. And for him, in essence of everything that was going on, send something like this to me just was like unbelievable. This meant more than I could ever imagine. And I'll always remember that. So that's awesome. Think about that when you want to do something for someone. Think, it won't matter. It does. It does matter.
Excellent lesson. Thank you so much. John, if anyone wanted to reach out to you and just be able to connect with you and just is going through a stroke or has a family member that is there a way they can reach out?
Yeah, sure. On Facebook. I'm on Facebook.
We'll spell your name.
Okay, Hamman, John Hamman. And I've had a couple of friends. One had his father had a stroke, and they called me, and we spent probably almost 2 hours on the phone just making them aware of what to expect. You know, my wife, in her own way, said something very smart at the time when I had the stroke, when she told my daughters that, you know, our lives have changed now. And this was the night the stroke happened at the hospital, and she was right. I don't know how astute I realized she was at the time, but she did, and it did. Everything changed quite a bit, and it's a matter that you have to be prepared for that. And I think that the family has to go along with it. It's almost like they had the stroke too, you know, if you're really caring, because they have to make the changes and the adjustments and everything to what's going to happen, you know.
Thank you so much, John. You're certainly not alone. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for everybody here for having us here.
If you think you're having a stroke or have any of the signs or symptoms, don't wait. Every minute, every second counts. Call 911. And for more information about strokes, you can reach out to cdc.gov, the American Heart Association. There are many avenues where you can learn more about what a stroke is and how you can identify it, stay safe, and prevent one. Thanks so much for being with us.